Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Flash Talk. At Lumu, we are highly committed to bringing different points of views about the industry to our customers and helping them make better decisions. And at the core, I founded Lumu with the firm belief that any enterprise can operate cybersecurity proficiently. I'm excited to have a very special guest today. Joseph Blankenship is joining us today. He is the VP of Research, and he's the VP and Research Director at the analyst firm and advisory firm Forrester. JB, I'm thrilled to have you on.
RV, thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Outstanding. It's a pleasure to have you and an honor, sir. JB, can I call you JB?
Absolutely.
Outstanding.
So we got a JB and an RV today.
That's what happened with us that have a long last name, right? So as I said at the beginning, we are a firm believer that all organizations, regardless of their size, can operate cybersecurity proficiently. And we know this because every day our customers tell us that. Their security teams, they demand to have a simpler and a more effective way to approach the breach problem. Now, tell us, how can this be done?
Well, you know, one thing I think we've really got to focus on and address, RV, is the issue of complexity. Year after year in our security technographic survey that we do with end users and buyers of security technologies all over the world, one of the things that they tell us is a top concern is the complexity of the systems that they use. So it's not only the complexity of the IT systems that the business uses to operate, but it's also the complexity of the security apparatus that we use to monitor and to secure those systems. So because we've got all of this complexity built in, it also kind of builds in vulnerabilities into the system. And then we add on this really complex layer of security controls on top of that, really complex IT environment. And it makes our job as security professionals really, really that much harder to do. So one of the things I believe that we've got to do as security leaders is to rationalize our technology investments and consolidate some of our security tooling instead of having myriad vendors doing myriad different things or one product per every use case. We really have to kind of evaluate some of those technology decisions and make these things easier to use. So rationalizing those investments means investing in technology that allows them to deliver the best prevention and detection possible where they're needed the most in the enterprise.
That's very interesting. Now, how can this be achieved? That's kind of the question, right? And I think the industry has been speaking about the concept of the assumption of a breach, at least for the last 15 years, right? However, ironically, technology is highly inclined towards the prevention of the breach. The question remains, why is this happening, right? And how enterprises can better balance prevention versus detection in cybersecurity?
Well, I think the question really goes back to the heart of what security is in the first place. It's actually built into the name. We're securing things. What does that mean? It means we're sort of hardwired to have this prevention first mindset. We want to create barriers to keep attackers or miscreants out of our systems and away from our data. So that prevention first mindset, if you even kind of get to the core of security as a profession, I like to use the analogy of banks. Many years ago, right, when people did not have confidence in banks, what did the banks do? They built a big building, usually out of stone with columns in front, built to look really, really strong. Inside the bank, they would build a vault, and the vault would be right in the middle of the bank, so everyone could walk in and see it. And they'd say, "Wow, look at that vault! My money's in that vault. It's secure." Then they would take, guards and put them in front of the vault, typically, armed with guns or whatever, right? So now the security took the form of armed guards standing in front of the vault, and wow, aren't we secure? And all of this was to protect the valuable assets. It was the hard currency, it was the gold, and to give customers faith that whatever they deposited in the bank was going to be there when they need it. So now we fast forward to the 21st century, right? The big buildings are relics. You can go to pretty much any town, at least around the US, and I would assume in other geos as well, and the big old bank buildings are now being repurposed for something else. And banks are typically, what are we doing? We're using our phones. We're interacting with the bank via computer. We might use an ATM, but we're no longer going into the big building, right? So all of our assets now are not hard currency or gold. They're digital. It's digital assets, right? And so now we don't really have all these big things to protect. So what did we do next? We had to protect the digital gold, the data. And so that became the security mindset of the 21st century, is we're going to build all these protections around stuff. Now, we kind of go back to that first question about complexity. Now, these are really complex systems, and because they're complex, they are vulnerable to being attacked. And that means we can't always have the same safeguards everywhere to protect data for every situation at all the time. We have to get a lot better at being able to detect and respond instead of trying to rely only on prevention. So acknowledging all of this stuff as a security professional, right, is really sort of difficult to process psychologically. We're kind of hardwired, like I said, to have this sort of protection and prevention mindset. So that's even harder to explain to any executives that we're trying to sell our security strategy or our program to, hey, we are going to do the best we can to keep people out, but we also have to adopt this mindset that we are vulnerable to attack and have to be able to respond quickly. So it's really, sort of like wrapping our brains around it. We can't put all of our assets, all of our bets on prevention. We actually need to be able to protect and defend when somebody's in our environment.
And I imagine we have to do that continuously, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And continuously.
It never stops, right?
And never stop, right? And I think continuously is a word that we like a lot because is rooted in the foundation of the story that we're building at Lumu. We have to continuously assess our state of compromise, right? And one question that comes to my mind is, with this amount of alerts that security teams are absorbing on daily basis, which triggers the alert fatigue issue, right? And I know you're speaking with customers all day, with vendors all day. What is the root of the alert fatigue issue, and how we got into this issue, and more importantly, how we can emerge from it in a way that does more, that creates more value for the customers.
Yeah, RV, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we made a decision a long time ago in security that may not have been the best decision, right? We said we wanted to bring in a lot of data, and then we're, if you'll kind of get into the vendor speak of it, right? We're going to find the needles in the haystack. And what we figured out was to build haystacks, we need lots and lots of data. So we turned security into this big data problem. And we decided that all data was important data, and we have to go and try to mine all of this data to find the things that are important. Now, one of the things that ended up happening is, without really adequately tuning this technology, it would throw a lot of alerts to a security analyst, and the security analyst is trying to figure out what's important to respond to, versus something else. The other thing that happened is we got duplicate alerts from different technologies. Now, we had the promise of things like SIEMs that were supposed to deduplicate these things, or sort of help us correlate all of these alerts, but it never really worked the way that it should. It was never really that easy to do, especially at scale and at speed. So we've got duplicate alerts, we've got a lot of data, we got poorly tuned technologies. All of these technologies, by the way, also have a different interface. So even if I'm responding to an alert in a SIEM, I may go and investigate it in something else, in whatever the tool was that originally alerted, and then it becomes really hard for the security analyst to keep up with all of these things. So what this really kind of tells us is, without the ability to successfully correlate these alerts at scale, we don't really know where to focus our efforts. So we have to get really high fidelity signal to our analysts. We have to give them the confidence that the alert that they see is actually something that's important. It's a true positive and not a false positive. So we've really got to get better with these technologies, and probably pivot away from treating security as this big data problem and really focus more on really high fidelity alerts where we have high confidence that something is happening and there's a potential for a breach.
That I think you touch a point that's highly important, and we see that from our customers, right? They like to spend their time in the alerts that truly matters. And
right.
I guess you mentioned that in the form of high fidelity alerts. We call that fact-based compromise detection, right? It tells the security analysts where to maximize the level of resistance that they can provide for the enterprise by touching an alert that makes sense to do so. Now, let's switch a little bit into how that connects with Zero Trust, which I know you're very familiar because it's a Forrester thing, right? So when you speak about the Zero Trust model and all these visibility or the visibility ring that is around the Zero Trust model, would you think that visibility ring or how you connect the visibility role into a sounded cybersecurity strategy in connection with the Zero Trust model?
Yeah, and RV, one of the reasons we put the ring, the visibility and analytics ring around all of these things is what we found out with Zero Trust. As we're conceiving Zero Trust, and then the Zero Trust extended model is kind of said, hey, most of our security tools are really focused outside. They're focused on what's coming at us from externally, and that's what it's reporting on. We had very little information that was being consumed by security operations about what was happening inside networks and inside systems. So one of the things we realized we had to do was to shine the light on where things are actually happening, where our assets are, where all of our data is stored and where it's processed, and where our users are operating. And that required that we needed to have visibility into the environment. We need to have visibility to what assets were attached to networks. We had to have visibility to the way that data was transacted. We had to have visibility to the way users behaved inside the systems. So it became really important that we bake that into Zero Trust, because we're going to say, hey, we're going to build these, the set of prevention techniques to protect data and to protect systems. We also have to be able to have visibility to the way all of those things are connected, and then be able to give security operators the visibility to anything that's happening inside the systems. So we made it a key part of the model to really be able to empower security teams to detect and respond to threats inside the environment, and not just what we are observing externally.
I think that makes a perfect sense, JB. And a lot of what we're seeing with our customers as well is that a ransomware attack is the evil effect of something that have been happening in the network for a long period of time, right? I used to call them, ransomware attack. It's a lot of small compromises, a lot of small incidents that were poorly addressed that resulted in a more pervasive issue. Now, going back to the visibility ring and into the concept of Zero Trust, and I often tell my customers, isn't it the purpose of Zero Trust to try to get to zero compromises? And they often say yes. Well, if that's the case, don't you agree that the visibility ring provides the ability to identify if your Zero Trust initiative is working? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it makes absolute sense, because without the ability to see how your systems are responding to something like a security test, a penetration test, to see if you're actually vulnerable to something, or see where vulnerable systems may reside. If you don't have visibility to those things, then you can't even you can't even begin to defend that environment. I think the other thing, RV, that becomes pretty important is part of what you said. Isn't the goal to prevent, the breach, or prevent, like a malware infestation, something like that? It's not just about prevention. It's also about containment. One of the reasons we design these systems the way that we do is we want to be able to contain them. If we're able to minimize something like a ransomware attack to one network segment or one set of devices or to a single device, now we've really saved ourselves from a huge business disruption. So it's also not all about prevention, but also response and containment.
It makes perfect sense. It's a sounded cyber defense strategy, right? We can win all the time, but we can protect the business all the time. That's something that I truly believe that enterprises can achieve, is to get the upper hand all the time. So let's talk a little bit about artificial intelligence, a topic that I know may cause a lot of issues in the market. And I tell you issues why, because suddenly any statistical assessment, even any deterministic assessment, was rebranded as AI once this AI revolution started. Do you have any recommendation for enterprises on how to separate the noise from the reality when it comes to AI?
I think you've really touched on something here with AI. When I started at Forrester 5 years ago, honestly, I was really excited about the potential of AI for security operations, because most of my coverage here was very focused on things like security operations and how do we do these things more efficiently. And I saw AI as having a lot of promise for that. The unfortunate piece, however, is that vendors haven't really delivered on this promise of AI as this intelligent capability that can fully automate security and make its own decisions. So basically what a lot of vendors did was they really overpromised. And I think it kind of it ended up setting us back in some ways, because now when security buyers actually hear the term AI, they sort of roll their eyes a little bit and think, that's not real. And hence your question: how do we tell what's real and what's not? How do we differentiate? So one of the things I think we've really got to do is understand what AI is, and we also have to understand that AI or machine learning, or however we want it, algorithmic decision making, however we want to describe it, it's a building block. It's not the end state, at least not yet. Perhaps one day, RV, we can come back, we can remember this conversation and say, wow, remember when we said that AI wasn't there? Well, here we are, now it's here. But we have to realize that it's a really important building block for a security tool, and not a standalone capability. You don't just go out and buy an AI and throw it in. We're not there yet. Instead, what you want to see from your vendor is that the AI ends up helping to get them to the desired outcome. So you should really focus on vendors that can articulate how they use AI as a part of their solution to deliver a real result, not just going around screaming AI, AI, AI. But they should be able to explain how the AI augments your other technologies, as well as your human analysts, your human security analysts that are pretty smart. And what they're looking for is a system that can help them get even smarter. That can help them make observations and data about threats that they can't see themselves or couldn't see fast enough themselves. So how does it augment the analyst, and how does it augment our other more traditional rules-based systems? So just saying AI powered or leading AI isn't really that helpful for us, but showing us how AI contributes to the actual security outcome is the really important part of this.
It makes perfect sense to me. I hope that it does for the customers as well. I know that to some extent the customers put the pressure on the vendors as well, and out of the sudden, the vendors are forced to speak AI because the customer wants to hear that as well. Just like now with SDR 10, right? Every customer wants to have an SDR strategy because the market is moving into that. and to some extent, it's some of the issues that this industry also have, right? It's that once there is some level of innovation, everyone wants to do to replicate that message because somehow that message is bringing dollars home. But I know you're familiar with that. Let's shift into the SIEMs topic, right? This is another topic that I know you're very familiar with. How do you see that technology evolving, and how do you see the SIEMs in the context of modern cybersecurity architectures?
Yeah, SIEM has been evolving for quite a long time. We kind of had this period, a little over a decade ago, where I think it had sort of plateaued. It became like the storage facility we just dumped logs into so we could meet compliance requirements. Then at a certain point, we kind of realized, hey, we really want to try to do threat detection with these things. So let's start, pumping tons and tons of data into the SIEM. Let's start feeding threat intelligence into the SIEM. Let's do all these other things. And the SIEM was really not built to handle that kind of a data problem. Like I said before, we started treating security as this big data problem. And so the SIEM manufacturer sort of responded and said, okay, well, we'll have to build a much more scalable infrastructure to be able to take all this stuff in. The problem was the rules-based SIEM still wasn't well suited for all of that. So one of the things, RV, is we really haven't even covered SIEM as a standalone capability here at Forrester in over a decade. And when I started about 5 years ago, I really started looking at this at the SIEM space as being a little more evolutionary, where we had gone from rules-based SIEM and we started adding in behavioral characteristics, things like user behavior analytics or network analysis and visibility, where we're looking at what's going on inside of networks, kind of getting that visibility to what's going on inside of a network. We also started adding elements of automation in. So now you've got all of these capabilities kind of being lumped together in what we describe as the security analytics platform market, where we're kind of bringing all of these different capabilities together. So I think that was one evolution. So our next evolution, I believe, is we're going to take SIEM out of the data center and out of the sort of the on-premise deployment that it's been locked in for a long time. It'll move to a much more cloud-delivered model. And instead of attempting to analyze all the data as some sort of a big data analytics problem, instead, now we're going to have to get far more selective about the types of data that we bring in, the scrutiny we apply to that data, how we prioritize that high fidelity data, and maybe we archive some of this other stuff. So if we need to go and conduct a threat hunt, we need to go back and do forensics, we've got that available. But for our actual focus on threat detection and response, we are really focused on things that we know are high fidelity alerts that we can have a lot of context about, and then we can apply automation to augment our human analysts.
That makes perfect sense. And to some extent, isn't it the network the source of the truth of threat detection in an enterprise?
That the network's a source of truth?
Yes.
It really is. So if you're kind of looking at what happens inside the enterprise, like I was saying before, we want to understand the way that systems typically work with each other. So that's one of the ways that we can detect malicious activity, is if we start seeing behaviors that are atypical for an asset, or we see a user that is acting atypically. It's a way for us to go and say, wow, this is unusual. Now we should surface this and see what's really going on here. I think one of the other things that we're starting to see, we've got this concept of extended detection and response. It's kind of the evolution of the EDR space. What we're really seeing is like one of those places where we get really rich signal is from the endpoint itself, because that's where things execute. It's also where our users are typically operating. So by bringing in some of the signal off the endpoint and then combining it with that network activity, now we've got a really rich sort of an event we can go and look at and conduct investigations with.
Makes perfect sense. JB, let's go back into another topic that it's in my mind, or has been in my mind for a long time, which is all these companies that have been breached most of those companies have all of the technologies that we have speak about here today, SIEMs, EDRs, and so on and so forth. They also have had managed service providers, a managed security service provider, right? Yet, as we all know, the adversary was within the network undetected for a long period of time, right? How do we explain this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Before I got here to Forrester, I'd spent many years actually in the MSSP space. I came to Forrester from an MSSP, so I kind of understand sort of the trials and difficulties of kind of the MSSP model. One of the things I can say is the MSSP business is really hard. Because as an MSSP, you're trying to be an expert on the environments of hundreds or perhaps even thousands of different customers. Really what the MSSP wants to do is they want to try to make everything as much the same from one customer as they can to the next. And by trying to do that, I think they lose a little bit in translation. We also made a lot of noise when I was at the MSSP about, hey, we're vendor neutral or we're vendor agnostic. No matter what thing you bring in here, what vendor asset you bring in here, we're fine with it. We'll take the logs on it. We'll do the alerts. So that also meant that we had to be expert in a very diverse technology stack, right? So now we've got this. We kind of talked about complexity before. So you think about that, hundreds of customers, thousands of customers, everyone's got a different technology stack. We're trying to be expert in all this stuff. We have no real business visibility into how the company works. We don't really know where all the vulnerable systems are. They actually may have some technology we don't recognize or know how to work with. And then we kind of went into this model. What we kind of jokingly refer to here at Forrester is the alert factory model. What is an alert factory, right? So I don't get paid necessarily as an MSSP for protecting your environment or finding threats. What I get paid for is log monitoring. So I'm going to monitor logs. We talked about the kind of the big data problem that exists in security. So I'm going to bring all this log data in. I'm going to do some security analysis on that data, and now I'm going to send you alerts as an MSSP, so the internal team can go work the alert. And that alert may or may not have a lot of context with it. It may actually not have a lot of understanding from the MSSP about what they're seeing, because they may not know a lot about the environment that they're monitoring. So the MSSP is taking these things in from something like a SIEM or some other system. They're quickly trying to validate those alerts. They're not really able to spend a ton of time on them. Then they pass it along back to the client. And that's that alert factory kind of thing. So what really ends up happening, RV, is that the MSSP has got this going on across all these customers, different analysts looking at the data for a customer, each and every day. And so there's very little context about what's going on and very little idea about what should be happening in the business. So you kind of look at all of those things, all of those issues, and you kind of say to yourself, in that kind of environment with that kind of a model, how can the traditional MSSP be successful with every client at every time? And I think that's what leads to some of those failures to detect, or at least failures to detect early.
Very, very interesting. And as an enterprise, you get the peace of mind that someone else is monitoring your network and your cybersecurity. But that expert and trusting may not really be an expert, at least in my enterprise. Very, very interesting point. Now, JB, we're getting to the end of this conversation. I've been enjoying this all along. And there's one aspect that I envy from the analysts, which is the access that you have to hundreds, if not thousands, of vendors on every year. Probably in another of my life, I will be an analyst. That I will truly love that. Now, after assessing hundreds or thousands of vendors, are you optimistic about cybersecurity?
Yeah, I am optimistic about cybersecurity. I've been in the space for a little over 15 years now. As you can see from the gray hair, I've been around for a while, but I've been in security for the last 15 plus years. And I can remember a time, RV, when we struggled just to get people to take us seriously or to understand what the heck cybersecurity was. We did a lot of campaigns, kind of focused toward executive teams, trying to get them to understand this as a risk and as a threat. Now, you kind of go forward and you say, wow, man, over the last 15 years, we've had all these breaches, all of these problems, all these awful things have happened. How could you still be optimistic? And I answer that by saying, hey, now we've got the awareness. This is a mainstream topic, not only in boardrooms. You hear a lot about, hey, cybersecurity is a topic in the boardroom, but it's a topic every time we get on, we look at media. However you consume your media, cybersecurity or some sort of cybersecurity impact is at the top. And now we're looking toward the folks that are, expert in the field, and you're saying, what do we do? How do we fix this, right? And so now you see these initiatives that are starting to come out where we're really focusing on cybersecurity as a risk to a business, a risk to the government, a risk just basically to our overall way of life. And so the vendor community is responding to that. We've got governments that are starting to respond to that. And so I actually am quite optimistic that now that we've got this focus, we're seeing this investment, we're no longer having to explain why it's important. So I am optimistic that we're making some real progress in the cybersecurity space.
Very insightful. I also remember those early days of our industry, JV, and that's what got me here. Working every day, more passionate than ever to solve this problem. One final question. Any recommendation for companies and vendors?
Oh gosh, I'd say one thing, RV, we touched a little bit on zero trust earlier. So I would say to anybody who is watching and they're saying to themselves, I've heard this term zero trust, I don't really know what it means. Or I've heard varying definitions of what zero trust might be. Familiarize yourself with the zero trust model, and start learning how that can help you design systems. Not just for prevention, like we were talking about before, but also for containment. It helps us focus our security apparatus on the things that are most important. It also brings us visibility and analytics for detection and automation and orchestration for a more automated response when we do have, threat activity. I'd also say, remember, not all data and not all systems are valuable. So trying to distill all this telemetry that you get from everything that's in your environment to produce some sort of a meaningful detection, it's expensive, and it's not really all that successful, as we were kind of discussing. Instead, really focus your resources on high fidelity sources of information in the systems that run your business. So the systems that hold your sensitive data and that are crucial to your business processes. It's not all about the data; it's also about business disruption as well. So think about the processes that are required to keep your business keep your business going. I think it's also kind of lastly is sort of understand your vulnerability state and how different actors, both internal and external. Don't forget that internal folks can be malicious too. That's something we like to think about. But think about how a malicious actor could possibly attack your systems. How could they possibly get in? What systems could they take advantage of? What vulnerabilities exist? How would they get there? So adopt that mindset that attackers have made it past your preventative technologies and have to be found before they can do damage. So you have to be able to contain what they're doing, or at least respond to it really, really quickly. So to do that, you've got to understand, how does the attacker operate and what would they likely do inside your unique environment? Because every environment is going to be different. So understanding your environment, the assets tied to it, and where the vulnerabilities may lie is really important for that defense.
I concur 100%. JB, thank you very much for your time today. You've been so candid on your answers, and and so much actionable information that you had shared with me and with our audience.
Thank you, RV. Thank you for having me. Really a pleasure to speak with you today.
Outstanding. All right, and I want to thank you all for spending the time with us today. And if you want to know more about Lumu and how we're helping more than 1,400 enterprises to measure compromise in real time or get more interviews like this one, be sure to visit our website, subscribe to our blog, or our YouTube channel so you can get real-time notifications. I hope you enjoyed these sessions, and until next time.